Hey guys, today I'm going to be making a video to show you how you can mix drums inside of Pro Tools using all Native Instruments software. Here we go. So here's my Pro Tools session. It's pretty basic right now. I have an instrument track, drums, that I have Kontakt 5 inserted on. I'm going to be using that as the drum samples. Then I have a master fader, and then I have my talkback microphone for the video. That's it so far. I'll open up Kontakt 5. I'm going to be using Studio Drummer here. This is a library. I have it because I own Complete 8 Ultimate, but you can purchase it separately as an individual package. And then I'm going to be using a bunch of effects that are part of the Guitar Rig 5 effects suite, but those all can be purchased separately as well from Native Instruments. Let me show you how I've got the session drummer set up a little bit. First here, I have just the standard session kit loaded up in the full number of samples. I have for the as a preset for the mixer preset, I just have it basically all the effects turned off, and then I have here are the instruments. I'll go through how I've got them set up. So for the kick drum, I've turned down the room mic a fair amount. I've turned down the overheads a little bit. For the snare, I've got them basically at unity here. For the hi-hat, I turned down the room a lot in the overheads as well. That's pretty common for what I've got for all the cymbals. I find that I don't like a lot of ambience on the cymbals. I prefer it more on the drums. So for the toms, they're basically the same as the snare. One thing, these are just like just trying to show you some general mixing techniques for pop rock drums. I've got the velocity curve of the samples in this one to maybe boost it up a little bit higher. Next thing I'll do is let's get some grooves going so I can audition the library and so you can hear how it just sounds. I'm gonna one thing that's nice about Studio Drummer and Kontakt 5 is you can drag and drop the grooves after you audition them straight into Pro Tools. So let me switch windows here to the edit window. Here's the instrument track. Let me just audition some grooves and drag and drop them in. I'm gonna just pull them from these different groove folders. So get just a general pop one going with some hi-hat closed at the beginning. Maybe something a little bit more interesting than that. Alright, so that's the basic intro part. Oh, you gotta drop it from here. So I'll drag that in right here. Let's find something in funk. As you can see, there's a lot of grooves with Studio Drummer. Each of these folders has a lot of grooves. And these are just for the, individual style of music folders. So let me grab something from funk. Interesting, but not too interesting and overcomplicated. How about something from indie rock? Boring. That's fine. Alright, how about a pop fill? Go over to here to the fills. Alright, now let's go to some hard rock for the chorus section with the ride so you can hear. Alright, so I'm not trying to really make, this a real drum song or anything, but I just wanted to show you how simple it is, to audition these grooves inside of Studio Drummer, the MIDI files, and then just drag and drop them straight in. You can even use these arrows to kind of surf between the different files. I'm going to go in here quickly, add some crash cymbals in at the beginning of these of the bars. So let me get this set up with my screen resolution now. Okay. So what I'll do, here's the kick and the snare and the hi-hat. So I'm just going to change this hi-hat note at the beginning. I'm shift clicking to kind of keep it in the same time location, and I'll find a crash. That's good. Alright, I'll take this one for my next bar. Different crash. Alright, we need some crash here. Alright, so what I'm going to do, just so I can create this as a loop, I'm going to consolidate it so it's one big long thing now. I have it in loop record. So now when I play it back, it'll just loop on over so I can start mixing. So let me press play, go back to Studio Drummer and Kontakt, and talk you through it a little bit more there. So now I've got the groove set up. I've got the kit going. I showed you how I like to turn down the room mics for the individual instruments, the cymbals especially, and the kick drum as well. I find especially for the kick drum to make it punch and have some intensity, I like to back off the room mics and even the overheads a little bit for that. That's just a matter of preference. Everybody does things a little bit differently, but that's how I like it. I like to now move over to the mixer so I can show you what I've got set up here. For the most part, this is just the basic setup with no effects going right now. The only thing that I've done here is I do have a little bit of an EQ on the kick, and really all that it's doing is right around the 300, right around 300 hertz. I backed it off a few dB. That's really if I boost this, let me solo it. That's kind of that boxy part of the kick drum. Tightens it up by pulling out right around 300 or 400. So hopefully you can hear that. Not a lot of EQing. I'm doing inside of Kontakt. The Studio Drummer library comes with these effects. What I'm actually going to be using is I'm going to go over into I'm going to use Guitar Rig on each of these individual tracks to add in effects. These are the SSL models of this is the GEQ, the Transient Designer or the Transient Master. This is the SSL Bus Compressor. All these ones are in Guitar Rig. However, Guitar Rig, I also have access to the vintage compressors that I'm going to be using a lot, and also the SSL compressor and gate. I'm using it more for the gate in there. So that's why I just have minimal processing going on inside of Studio Drummer. Same thing with the snare. I've just got a little bit of EQ going on it. I've used a narrow Q. I found a frequency that I didn't like. It resonates a lot. What you have to be careful of is these frequencies down here are the fundamental frequency of the snare, and I like how those resonate. So I don't recommend taking out all frequencies that resonate, but I do finding ones that don't sound very good and taking them out. So I've done that here, backed off that a little bit. Same thing going on with the higher frequencies. I found that one and took it out. So if you look up here, I guess the only other things that I've changed is I've panned the drums, or the toms a little bit. The 4 toms, I've kind of split them out. And I'll explain why in a second, based on how I do my routing outside of Kontakt. And then I've got the overhead and room, and I'm not using the mono overhead mic. It's just a matter of preference. But right now, if you look at settings, so like for the kick and snare, I've done a little bit. I backed off the in mic a little bit for the snare, or for the kick, I'm sorry. Because I can come up with plenty of attack and punch on the kick, so I backed it off a little bit. The out mic and the sub mic I just have there, and then I backed off the bleed a little bit on the snare. So if you look here in the settings, each of these channels, they're going out through the master, and the master is set up inside of Studio Drummer to be here, so you can control that. However, how that works is then the master goes out. If you look at your output mixer from Kontakt, the master from Studio Drummer is going to go out your main output from Kontakt. So that just goes out as a stereo mix of your drums onto your instrument track. So what you can do is, put in effects in Pro Tools that go over your whole mix, and that's one way that you can use Studio Drummer, especially if you like the effects inside of Kontakt that you can use here, or you can even use other effects if you do more complicated routing inside of Kontakt, external of Studio Drummer. You can do that. However, what I like to do actually, and I've got it set up here at the output, is actually send out each of the individual instruments to their own track so I can mix it separately in Pro Tools. So if you haven't done this before in Kontakt, it's something that you have to set up first before you can really use it inside of Studio Drummer. So what you do is you would go into your output mixer page, and then you would click Add Channels. And you can add, a fair amount if you'd like, if you're going to do it all at one time. I have these set up as stereo channels, So if you look at the mixer in Studio Drummer, all these the outputs can be stereo channels because you can pan them. So you would want to have number of channels too for stereo. And then what you do is you would go in here and then for you setting it up the first time, they won't be named. And so you'd have to name them yourself. But I've named them and set them up as kick, snare, toms, and they're each stereo channels, room, hi-hat. I had the cymbals one because in the Abbey Road's drummer series, the modern drummers, 80s drummer, 70s, 60s, they have cymbal tracks, so I have those set up just from that. And then what you can do is make this your default configuration. That way, each time you open up Kontakt, you have all these being bust out, and I'll show you how that shows up in Pro Tools in a second. But what you have to end up doing is like finding the kick, and your mains are assigned to output 1, 2 in Kontakt. Output 1, 2 automatically goes down the instrument track if you have Kontakt on an instrument track. However, what you can do is set up the other ones. So I have these right here set up as output 3, 4 for the kick, 5, 6 for the snare, and so on all the way up. So let me go back here and assign these. The output now is going to go to kick for the kick, snare for the snare. Again, unless you assign these yourself, they won't show up. So just take some time. I recommend doing that. And create your own output mixer in Kontakt. That's the best way to do it. So we've got some toms. I gotta make sure I have the overheads now, going to the overheads, the room, going to room. Alright, so now if I play it back, you're actually not gonna see these coming in on the instrument track. And the reason why you hear them is because I've already created, let me bring those up. I've already created some auxiliary synths. Let me show these ones here first. Show these. All right. So what happens is you can use auxiliary tracks like I've done here by creating a new track, creating them as stereo auxiliary inputs. And then what you do is you go to the input and output, and you can go into the plugins for the input instead of bus or interface like normal. You can go to plugins, and the input of the track can be the outputs from Kontakt that you've created. So I've created them called kick, snare, toms, overhead, room, and hi-hat. And then I've assigned them here to each of the inputs for all of the auxiliary tracks. So now when I play it back, you can hear it, and I have the outputs going just to my master fader right now. So this is the simple raw mix. I've pulled the hi-hat and the overheads down a little bit and the kick down a little bit, room down a little bit. A little too much of the bottom mic for me on the snare. Alright, that's better. Alright, so, these samples, they were recorded pretty well, and I can tell that Native Instruments has already done some very minimal processing on them to make them sound a little bit better than, these are more than just like very raw samples. These have some processing already going on with them. So there's other drum libraries that you can purchase that are very raw in their playback of the samples, but these samples have been treated a little bit to sound a little bit better. So you don't have to do as like surgical kind of processing, like EQing it at the beginning. If you look at some of my other tutorial videos, I talk about how to do like some subtractive equalization when you're mixing drums to pull out the problem frequencies. I've done that a little bit on the kick and the snare, but those are mainly just things like for the kick drum. Mostly everybody pulls out around 200, 300, 400 with a pretty wide Q to kind of take away that boxy sound to the kick drum. So I've done just basic tweaking. You don't have to do a whole lot, but I'm going to show you now how I have it set up, how you can mix the individual drum mic tracks, basically like you would if this were a acoustic drum set that you recorded on individual tracks. So like if you had a full mixing session where you recorded a live drummer and you recorded some kick drums, some snares, mics, all they're mixed together here on this track, and you have toms, and how you can process them. So these kind of techniques, you can use them for sample drum libraries, or you can also use them for acoustic drum recordings. So let's start with the kick drum. I'm going to show you quickly. I already have it set up a little bit here inside of Guitar Rig, how I like to mix the kick drum. So first off, I have this right here. I'm using the Solid Dynamics. This is the SSL compressor and gate. I'm really just using the gate. Right away, what I want to do is I want to shape the envelope of the kick drum hits. So you have the opportunity to mix in kind of like a parallel compression or parallel gating. Just because I'm using the gate, I've pulled the dry out completely, and I just have the leftover processed or affected signal. I'll play it back, and you can hear how I've set up the gate. What it's doing is it's kind of it has a fast attack, so that as soon as the drum hit takes place, the gate is opening and letting the kick drum through. But then what it's doing is it's attenuating or decreasing the volume at the end of the samples of each individual hit. So here it is. Right now I have it in bypass. Let me put this back in and play it back and show you what I've done. So these are just the raw samples. Let me turn that gate on. I guess I'm using an expander right now with a pretty high range. What you can do is play around with the release to take off more or less of the sustain of the hit. What this is going to do for your drum mix is emphasize the attack at the start of the drum hit much more, and make your drums sound really tight, and also add some punch, add some intensity to them. The range knob controls how much you're going to attenuate. So here you're not really attenuating much, and then as you increase this, you're attenuating more and more. The threshold determines, when the gate kicks in and turns off. All right, so that's all the process I'm doing with the SSL Solid Dynamics gate right here. The next thing I'll do is compress the signal. One thing I really like about the Vintage Compressors package is the DBX 160 model. They have it as the vintage compressor 160. This compressor is awesome for kick drums and snares. I've used it here. What it does is it has a you don't really have control over the attack and the release settings of a compressor like you would on some compressors like the 1176. But you can sort of control those things based on the threshold, the compression ratios. So let me kick it on. And what it does is it has a kind of a slow attack, so it lets the transient of the drum hit through, and then it compresses the end of it a little bit, but it adds some character and some color to the whole signal, including the transient. So here it is. So what you need to do is what you want is for the signal, at least how I have it set up, that I want it to be compressing part of the time and part of the time not compressing. So you have to watch here the below and the above for the DBX. For this compressor, how much it's, I guess I'm doing some clipping, so I'm going to back it off. And then you can control how much it compresses with this. So this is your kind of your ratio knob, where you can go from, this is a 1-to-1 compression is actually just adding some color, some character to it, and then this is where you're actually starting to attenuate. For every 1 dB that goes above your threshold here, you're gonna knock off 3 dB, or for every 3 dB that goes through, you're going to only allow 1 dB through above your threshold. So that's how the VC 160 works. I think it adds, I'm not doing a whole lot of gain reduction right now, and you can see that here. But if I turn it off, you can hear how much of a difference it's making to the punch of the kick drum. It's kind of flat, kind of flimsy sounding. That adds a lot of emphasis to it. One thing that's pretty cool about these compressors as well in the vintage compressor series is you have this dry, wet, this mix. I'm actually just using it with the dry level turned off, and it's just the compressed or processed sound going through it. Alright, next thing is that I have set up that's kind of unique, because I'm using the Guitar Rig software. I have this custom EQ that's part of the Guitar Rig package, and typically, most people don't think, oh, I'm gonna mix drums, why don't I pull up Guitar Rig? But you can use it more as an effects suite package than necessarily a amplifier simulation software if you want. And so I'm going to use this custom EQ. So hopefully you can hear what that's done. So it's a little papery sounding right here. And just by using the custom EQ with a scoop, and I'm scooping right around 400 Hertz. I've got the tone set to unity. You can back that off if you want to emphasize a low end. You can bring out the attack. I like it for this application. All I really want to do is scoop. I don't want to really change the tone of it, like rolling off the high end or rolling off the low end. So all I've done is just added the scoop, and I think that really helps the kick. Next is the solid EQ. So I did a little bit of shaping inside of Studio Drummer using the solid EQ. This is the SSL EQ. that comes with the solid package from Native Instruments. Let me show you what I've got going on here. All that I've done really is boosted a little bit of the low end, just a few dB. This is 3 or 4 dB, right around 60 or 70 hertz is usually what I like with the bell. Typically what I'll do also is use the high pass filter to make sure there's nothing below, anything below 30 hertz is only going to give you problems when you for your final mix. So almost everything I roll off below, every instrument, including kick drum, roll off around 30 hertz. Because most of that stuff is pretty inaudible and it doesn't really add much to your mix. However, it might screw up when you're trying to have a consistent level for your master. The only other thing I've done here is boosted around 2K. What this adds to the kick drum is the snap, that attack. If you want to add some more air, you can go around 3K with a high shelf. That makes it more crisp. That's just a matter of preference. So that's how I've EQ'd. It's kind of a combination of EQ where I'm scooping out the low mids with a custom EQ, and I'm using the solid EQ to boost the low end, and then also add that smack to the kick drum with the 2K. Finally, I've got the transient master. What I've done here is backed off the sustain a little bit. This is similar to how I've used the gate to tighten up the kick drum sound. And that's really it. Let me kick it on and you can hear what it's doing. Not a whole lot. You can make it more extreme if you want. You can also add some more sustain if that's the drum sound you're going for. I'm going for a pretty tight drum sound, so that's why I've got it backing off the sustain. So let me go through and you can hear what each part is doing here on the kick drum again. This is what we started with. So that's a pretty tight drum sound for the kick drum. Let me move on to the snare. Similar sort of thing. Let me kick on guitar rig. I've got a pretty similar setup going. I don't have the custom EQ at all, but I've got the gate right out of the bat. Next, just like before, I'm adding the 160 compressor to give it that character, that more of a punch sound. You can see how I've got the dry level down, no parallel compression going on. But if you like to do that, you can do that. That's one nice thing about this compressor package versus if you get a compressor package from some other companies, they don't always have the parallel drum mixing. That's something that I think Soft Tube has done with a lot of their compressors as well, and then they brought it over on their collaboration with Native Instruments on these compressors. So next is my EQ. Here what I've done is add some low end around 200. That's a fundamental frequency. That's the body of the snare that I brought out. I've rolled off again here, around 40 hertz. You're not really going to get much going to the snare drum below 40 hertz that you're really going to be taking out, but there's a little bit of kick bleed coming through. so it's not a bad idea to roll that out. I've taken out here this frequency around 4, so you can hear what I'm taking out of it. I've added again around 2K. That's the punch of the snap of the snare drum, and I've rolled off here above 16K. You don't need that much high end on the snare. What I've done here, I've added a little bit of attack to kind of emphasize the transient of the snare drum more, and I've backed off the sustain here so you can hear what that's doing. You know, on its own, it doesn't really sound very natural, but when you're going to hear it in the context of the full mix, and it sounds much better then. So let's, I'll unsolo this, and you can hear so far what we've done without even processing the other instruments. Let me back off the guitar, bypass them, and you can hear just what we've done so far. Alright, next let's move on to the toms. Now the toms I only really have going for part of the drum performance, so let me switch over here to the edit window, move this out of the way. It's just this bar, really. Switch back to mix, solo, toms. Alright, same thing as before. I've got the expander, the gate right away. What this doing is it's cutting out the sustain a little bit of the toms, because for the close mics, I really want the close mics to add a lot to the initial hits, but then I don't want the sustain to kind of muddy up the mix on, you know, the time between drum hits. I want to not have a lot of sustain, so that when the drums do hit, they sound more separate. So that's why I've got a gate initially. I'm using this 160 compressor again. I think it's great for drums. Here's my compression ratio. Pretty high. You know, I'm still not doing a whole lot of gain reduction. I'm compensating the gain a little bit. I don't have any dry level going. Next is my EQ. Same sort of thing. I'm adding down here around 200. That's the low end. I'm rolling out. Rolling out a little bit on this frequency. 900. I didn't like that one, so I've taken that out. Next, I've added in around 2K again. I've even boosted a little bit of the high end above 4K. What I have done though, so I use this low pass filter. So basically my high shelf that I have going on here is going to go from 4K up to 16K. So anything above 16K is getting taken out. Anything above 4K to 16K is getting boosted. So you can hear how, you know, those frequencies are pretty important for the toms. Alright, and just like the snare, I added a little bit of attack, not a whole lot at the beginning, and then pulled off some sustain at the end to tighten it up a little bit. So bypass. Doesn't sound bad, but you add the toms really start to cut through then if you do that. So quickly I'm going to move on to the hi-hat. I'm not doing a whole lot here. what I've done now is I don't need to use a gate for a hi-hat. I don't really like to do that. As a cymbal, I don't want to, because a hi-hat's a cymbal, I don't want to, I don't like gating those things very much. So I'm going to use now, I like to use the 1176 instead of the DBX 160 compressor, because what I've done is I've set it up with a really fast and really fast attack and really fast release ratio of only 4:1. Then what you do is you use the input to drive the compressor so that you're getting the desired amount of gain reduction here. Let me go and unbypass it, turn it on, and show you what I've done. Dry level again is down. This is completely compressed. I just want about 2 or 3 dB of gain reduction just at that initial hit, so that it kind of controls the transients of the hi-hat hit. So with the 160, the DBX 160, it kind of has a slow attack time and like a fast release time. So that's what gives it its signature sound, its character. The nice thing about the 1176 model, the VC76, from Softtube and Native Instruments, is you can control the attack. So here what I want is the compressor to come on right away at the transient of the hi-hat and then turn off as soon as the transient's finished. So it kind of smooths out the hi-hat and makes it less harsh at the beginning for the initial hits of the hi-hat. So that's what I've done with the 1176. The next, I've got the solid EQ. I haven't done a whole lot other than roll out everything below 200. So for the hi-hat, there's really not a whole lot of stuff down there. If you're mixing like a full acoustic kit that you're not triggering samples that are made completely in isolation, you'd probably have some bleed of other instruments. So it is a good idea for your hi-hat, if you have a hi-hat mic that you're using, to roll out a lot of the low end. It helps isolate the hi-hat in your recorded signal. I've backed off this frequency around 1500. I had, using a narrow Q to sweep out, just the frequencies around 1500, because I boosted it before and finally I didn't like it. I've added a little bit of high end around 4K. You can hear what that's adding. Then I'm using a low pass filter similar to what I was doing on the toms, so that without using it, kind of sounds harsh on the high end. So I've backed it off to around 14, 15K. So, I haven't done a whole lot with the hi-hat, but I've cleaned it up a little bit. I have it panned as well. Here's what it was coming out of Studio Drummer. I put the hi-hat on the left. Alright, let's talk about the overheads. This is what they sound like out of Studio Drummer. Open up guitar rig. Sort of like what I've done with the hi-hats, I'm going to do with the overheads. Let me kick on the compressor, 1176. I have a, pretty fast attack, but not super fast, but not super slow as well. What this is going to do is allow a little bit of that transient to sneak through the compressor, but then pull out a little bit of the sustain. You're really controlling how much the compressor's doing with this input drive knob. That's heavy compression. That has its place, but for the overheads, I want them to sound pretty clean. This 1176 compressor adds a little bit of analog character to it. gets your overhead mics under control. They sound good for all the instruments in your drum kit, from the kick, the snare, and the cymbals. If you think back to what I've got going on in Studio Drummer, this is where let me switch back over to the kit view. Here I've got the snare and the toms coming through pretty loud. Maybe even I would want a little bit more of the snare. And it's the cymbals that I backed off a little bit. That's the kind of blend and mix I like in the overheads. Alright, it's getting a little boring, so I'm going to switch back to the full performance. So here's what I've added. Alright, the EQ. I've added a little bit of low end, actually deciding that I want less at low end. So that's kind of to emphasize the kick drum around 100 Hertz, 125 Hertz. I've rolled off everything below 60 Hertz. I don't want, my overhead sounding too muddy. I've rolled off here with a high Q, around 700. This is the frequency that I want to take out. Same thing, high Q, narrow Q, 1500. What I did is I swept through here, and that frequency particularly sounded harsh when I boosted it, so I pulled that out. We got a little high end going above 2K all the way up to 14K again. So you can hear what I've done. Again, transient master. Here all I've done is add a little bit more attack. The sustain is at 0%, so I'm not really shaping the sustain. Here all I'm doing is boosting a little bit of attack to make the overheads a little bit more lively, a little bit more crisp in the mix. Finally, I've got the room mic. Well, here's what I've got so far. Alright, now let's work on the room. Alright. So for the room mic, again, I'm going to use the 1176. It's a great compressor for drums. It's probably the go-to one, typically for drums. I think the DBX 160 does some cool things as well. I want to show you a common technique for the room mics of drums. I think it's a little bit of an overused trick, but if you're interested in mixing drums, if you're not aware of this trick, you should know about it, because it's pretty common. And if your clients ask you, I want my drums to sound huge. I want them to sound like how I hear a lot of stuff on the radio or something like that. This is pretty much the trick that you got to use, and it's the all buttons in mode on an 1176. Drive the input fairly hard. What I've done, here's the dry, with the dry level down. So this is all processed going on here. Drive the input pretty hard. A slow, relatively slow attack, because what you're really doing is squashing the sustain of the room. Pretty, medium release time. I'll show you how that sounds differently than other ratios. Drums, you know, they really come alive. The room mics do. Here. Now, one thing that I do like to do, because this is a little extreme for me, you know, although this is a popular technique, I don't use it all the time when I'm mixing drums to really overdrive the room mics. But if I'm going to, I'll mix in some dry signal as well. Here's a dry, all the way up. Mix in a little bit of dry. Make it sound less extreme. Alright, I've EQ'd a little bit here. Roll off a lot of the high end to make the room mic sound darker. Same thing as with all the instruments, I've pulled out some low end, boosted a fair amount around 150 hertz. Here I'm cutting this frequency 500. It's a pretty narrow Q. Boosted around 2K. And then everything above 2K with a shelf, all the way up to about 14. I'm using a high shelf there. And just like overheads, I add a little attack. Nothing on the sustain. So let's hear how it sounds now with the. I'll bypass it. You can hear what the processing's done to your room mics. But in the context of your mix, that's a lot of room. You know, as a special effect for, you know, a specific part of your song, this can sound good, but you got to mix it in to taste if you're going to be using this on a, you know, with a full mix, bring down the rooms. It sounds cool. But you don't need a whole lot to sound good. Alright, so let me just bypass these. You can hear how the full mix now sounds unprocessed and processed. All right, so next I want to talk about some bus mixing. So we've got the individual channels mixed how I like them. One thing I have in my other videos, but I'm going to include here, is talk about parallel compression, because I think it's another one of those things, just like the 1176 room mic compression technique, that everybody that mixes drums should at least know about, whether they use it or not, on a regular basis. Parallel compression can add a lot, especially for, you know, kind of just your typical pop rock drums that you know, are very popular in many styles of music nowadays. So what I've done is I've set up 2 more auxiliary channels, and I'm going to have these one be my clean channel. So that with parallel compression, what you want to do is you want to have one channel be dry, and then your other one be compressed, and you mixed in the compressed one with the dry one. So that's why it's parallel, called parallel compression. So right now I have these individual tracks going out to my master fader. So what I'm going to do now is take these individual tracks. If I shift option click, I can control all their output at the same time. And I'm going to send it to my bus clean here. What I've done is then created the input as this one called clean. You can if you right click in Pro Tools, you can rename So most of the time they just come up as bus 1, 2, but I recommend renaming them. So I've called this one clean, and then the input I've called this one compressed. And what I want to do is send them out to the same. What I want at the end is a single fader that I can control the overall level of drums on. So I have this one called drum bus right here. So how it's going to work is these individual tracks are going to come in here on the clean channel. The clean channel is then going to pass the signal over to the bus right here. However, let me bring up my sends, and I've got these sends mapped for the kick, snare, toms, and overheads to my compressor channel. And some people, when they do parallel compression, what they'll do is just send the same amount of signal from each of the individual tracks to the clean channel and the same amount of signal to the compression channel. And then they'll just over compress this one and then blend it in to taste how they like with a clean. However, for me, the parallel compression, the best part about it is to add that extra intensity and the punch to your drums. And I think that's done best with the kick, snare, and tom individual tracks and then the overhead track. If you add in too much room, it kind of muddies up the mix. So typically for my parallel compression, I'm only sending in signal from the overheads, toms, snare, and kicks. So let me unbypass these. All right, and let me show you the routing. Right now, I've muted the parallel compression. You're just going to hear the clean mix going through here. I've bypassed the effect I'm going to use here. And then on my bus, I also have another effect I've bypassed. So for these parallel compression sends, what I've done is created a bus and then labeled the bus comp. I'm making these pre-faders because I want to separately control the level that's driving the compressor from the signal that's coming in that I'm going to send to the clean one. So if you make these post faders, if you change this one up and down, the send level gets changed as well just by changing this one. So if you make it pre, then you can move this one up and down and the same level of signal gets sent out there. So I like having the independent control, so that's why I've clicked on this all as pre. I've gone in a little bit already and adjusted the level how I like it, but typically, I like a lot of snare, a lot of toms going through, a little bit less kick, and a lot less of the overheads, because when you heavily compress, you're going to hear a lot of those cymbals and stuff anyway, and sustain anyway. But what I'm trying to do is just bring out the attack a little bit. So let me mute this one and just listen to the parallel compress. Bring this up a little bit. So this is the dry signal that I'm sending to the parallel compression channel. Now, you don't have to use Guitar Rig, because Native Instruments has released some of these compressors now as standalone plugins, which I hope they do with a lot more of their things inside of Guitar Rig as well, including the SSL bundle and some of the other ones as well. I hope they release all of those as standalone plugins, because I would probably use them a lot more often. But anyway, there's nice things about being able to bring up Guitar Rig and having all the plugins, be able to be used inside of one single insert slot if you want to add a lot of them. There's also, good things about seeing exactly your signal chain inside of Pro Tools without having to open up Guitar Rig and see what you have going on. So I'm going to use the 1176 on my parallel compression channel with a really fast attack and a really fast release. And what that's going to do is take out a little bit of the transient hit. Just put it a little bit under control. It's not really, killing the transient, but it's squashing it a little bit to give it some character. You can use the input to kind of drive it over threshold for a compressor. Alright, that's pretty much how I want the 1176 set up. Next, I have the VC2A, or the model of the LA2A going. And this is another common signal path that I think everyone that mixes drums should be aware of. And actually, this combination of VC6 or 1176 being fed into the LA2A is a great combination for not just drums, but all kinds of other instruments, from guitars, bass, vocals even, because the two compressors really complement each other great. With the 1176, you have a fast attack and fast release, whereas the LA2A is more of a smoothing compressor. So rather than just squashing the transient, what it's going to do is smooth over the entire hit. So let me show you what I've done here. Here's without the reduction. By increasing this one over here, that's when you start to see some gain reduction. I have some makeup gain going. You can hear what it's doing. It's just breathing some life, adding some air to the hits. This isn't a great sound by itself, but I think that it complements when I add in the clean in a second, you'll hear how what it does is it adds so much more to the drum mix by having this over compressed, heavily compressed signal used. The last thing I want to mention is I've used the side chain. I guess it's not really a side chain. It's a detector high pass filter, so that the kick drum doesn't cause the compressor to kick on too much. So what I'm doing basically is telling the compressor to ignore frequencies below 200 hertz. And if depending on how loud your kick drum is, it might be above the threshold of the compressor, especially those low frequencies. And so the compressor might, you can hear that it starts to kind of get over compressed if you have too much of the kick drum. So what I'm doing is telling the compressor, ignore those frequencies below 200. That's mainly my kick drum, and only compress the frequencies that are above. Only have the compressor turn on based on frequencies above 200. So it's still going to compress those frequencies below 200, but it just doesn't decide when it's going to compress based on those low frequencies. So that's my parallel compression channel. Let me pull this out, get the dry signal going again, and show you what happens when I mix in now the parallel compression, how that adds a lot to the mix. On its own, the parallel compression channel doesn't sound good. but neither does the clean channel really after you've heard the parallel compression one. So maybe I have a little bit too much. The last thing I've done on the clean channel is use the transient master and pull out just a little bit of the sustain on the overall drum mix. I think that just adds a little bit extra to the mix to make it a little bit more tight. Last, I have my bus channel right here, and all that I've done is called up the solid bus compressor, and I have my whole mix coming through the bus compressor. You know, that's a pretty slow attack time, so that the transients are still punching. A really fast release time. For drums, this is how I like to set it up. You know, if this were a whole mix, I wouldn't have such a fast release time. Maybe not even a slow attack time, maybe a faster attack time. Then I set the ratio low, because I don't want a whole lot of compression going on. I just want to glue it together, and I wanted to bring the whole mix together. Control the threshold for the... You can hear that when I don't have any compression going on by bringing up the threshold. There's no gain reduction going. That's too much. Right about there. You're getting a little bit of gain reduction to tighten everything up, but not too much. I have a little bit of the dry signal mixed in, but it's mostly wet. So this is the uncompressed, and this is the compressed. That was a ratio that I found that I liked. Add a little bit of makeup gain. You can see where my drum mix is sitting now. So let me go back in now and show you what I've added. Here's our drum mix coming out of Kontakt. For a lot of people, this is you know, what they're working with for their mixes. I don't think it's bad. However, I think that, you know, with some simple tweaking, you can really make the mix come alive. So first, got the parallel compression bypassed. Bring all the mixing back in. Add in parallel compression. Add in the master bus. Alright, so that's the mix so far. The last thing I'm going to cover, which I haven't added in my other videos, is talking about adding reverb to drum mixes. What I actually like to do is have two reverb channels. One is going to be a short reverb, and one's going to be a long reverb. I have these being sent, just like my parallel compression, from the kick drum, although not a whole lot of the kick drums coming through the reverbs. Sends a lot of the snares, a little bit of toms, more so on the short reverb than the long reverb, and then a little bit of the overheads. And just like before, I've bussed these and then I've renamed them short verb and long verb, so you can see what's going on. Now let's bring up guitar rig. Let's bypass these. Now what I can do is if I actually turn off these, you can just hear the reverb. Here's my short reverb channel. So I'm using reflector inside of guitar rig. I guess I didn't mention this before. I have these, you have to set up, and then stereo, I bypass the gate, and I have the high, I I guess this is oversampling inside of Guitar Rig. So I brought up the small rooms, and the one I decided that I liked was this bright small room, and I just have the decay and the size settings set like this. I back the dry off, and I have all wet going through. What I'm going to do is for the different reverbs, I have the short one and I have the long one. Is I want them to kind of complement each other. I picked the bright small room specifically because I want the short room reverb to have more high frequencies and less low frequencies, and then the other way around for the long reverb is I want there to be more low frequencies for that one, and then less high frequencies. So I've boosted a little bit here, the envelope of the high one, so this will bring out more of the sustain of the higher frequencies here, above 15 or 16. Then for the low frequencies below 500, I'm going to cut out a little bit of the sustain on those. I've increased the width all the way up for the reverb. Before I bring in the mix, let me switch over to the long reverb. I'm using the big studios now. Big studios. And then I came in and found the scoring studio. You know, this is a pretty long reverb tail. I boosted the low end and brought down the high end, just like I was talking about earlier. These are the frequency settings I've got. That I've increased the width, got all wet signal coming through. And that's really it as far as the reverb setup. I guess I have the size maybe even a little bit larger. Let's see how these sound together. Alright, now bring back in the mix, and I'll mix these in, and you can hear the short reverb. What it does is it increases the intensity of the drum hits right after the transient, whereas the long reverb kind of adds the sustain. Let me bring this back in. So that there's the room mic from before that adds some reverb. I'll bring it down a little bit while I'm mixing the short reverb. Mixing a little bit of the long reverb. What you can do is then use all three of these, the long reverb, the short reverb, and your room mic to shape or change the sound of the ambience of your drums. You know, if you want to tighten it up, you back these off. Add more of that huge drum sound by adding more room. And that's all I really have for you guys today. Thanks for checking out the video. Hopefully you picked up some new ideas about how to mix drums with Pro Tools, and checked out some of the Native Instruments software. I was using Kontakt 5, the Studio Drummer, and then using Guitar Rig and the vintage compressors to mix the drums. And talked about using short reverb and long reverb for drums. Some people just like to use a single reverb channel that's somewhere in the middle. Like, here's a pretty short reverb channel or reverb send with only about 500 milliseconds of reverb. And this other one's pretty long with 2.8 seconds of reverb time. So what I like to do is mix the two of them together. They bring out different aspects of the drums differently, rather than you just use one that's in the middle, maybe about 1 second or 1.5 seconds. So that's the reverb. Hopefully you picked up some things about parallel compression, bus mixing, and got an idea about some of these compressors like the DBX 160, what that can do for your drums, as well as some general EQing. Again, I didn't have to do a whole lot of mixing with these drums because they come pre-processed from Native Instruments. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to leave some messages down here on the YouTube page, and I'll be sure to answer them. If you have any recommendations for other videos you'd like to see. So far, I've really just worked on mixing drums. In the future, though, I will plan on looking at other instruments. So stay tuned for that. Check back often, and subscribe to me, and check me out on Twitter as well. Hopefully you guys keep rocking out, make music as much as you can, and enjoy the videos. Take care, guys.